Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with Rabbi Chaim Checkmate Coffman, the most controversial rabbi on the internet. Welcome back. How are you today, sir?
Doing great. Always a pleasure to be here.
Very good, very good. So we had a little bit of a delay bug there getting going, but we got her all figured out. My tech guy, Rabbi Coffman, helped me work through that one quite well. So moving further on.
Everybody should know it wasn't my fault.
It was not his fault.
He's going to blame me. It's not my fault.
Nope.
Not my fault.
Nope. And trust me, I know that you will gladly take that responsibility for blowing up my studio proudly. So for you to reject it this time really means it wasn't.
And I was like,
that's funny. What's really funny is when I was back there and I said, okay, unplugging now, and you go boom on the phone. It kind of made me jerk my head there for a second. I wasn't sure what just happened. So
you always have to make sure it's Coffman proof.
It has to be. Point. It does. It has to be. No doubt about it. So we're going to go on to right away. In fact, I'm even going to edit the title to include this discussion on Daniel 9. Most Christians don't care, but Messianics do, and they try to use that to prove Jesus and the Yeshua thing, whatever. So this would be it could be good to go over this and how all this Daniel 9 to 70 weeks actually works. So I'm going to pass it on along to you. Really glad you're able to make it here, and all you viewers out there as well. Be sure to hit that like button and turn on your notifications. Also, you can follow me on Facebook. It's going to be the most active place you'll find me posting updates on shows and whether things are on time or not. So
as long as you don't get sizzled and the chat gets disabled, right? So.
Yes, exactly.
Don't push that button.
Don't touch that dial. That's exactly right.
Don't touch that dial.
That's really, really right. Cool. All right, Rabbi, I'll pass it along to you. It's all yours.
Okay. Always a pleasure. Sorry for the delay, but again, wasn't my fault. It was his fault. So I'm just gonna pass the buck over here.
I deserve that.
In any case, there's a lot of controversy, as maybe the English would say, or others would say, or controversy, so to speak, about Daniel 9, and exactly what's going on there. I had somebody actually dog me months ago. And, about this whole thing. So, I sent him a little blurb or, a couple paragraphs, never heard from him again. So either he never looked at it, didn't waste my time, or, that's why I got the nickname for Checkmate over here. So the book of Daniel is, it's funny in a certain way that, the Christians, they take like some of the hardest verses, to interpret, and they run with it. So, Daniel, Isaiah, Ezekiel, they're difficult to go through, right? And as we always say, the most important thing is seeing things in context. And we're going to see this very clearly what's going on. Context is everything. So people are going to claim, there's going to be this claim there are messianic illusions that even potentially left Daniel, questioning, what in the world, is going on. A lot of the book itself, most people probably realize, not written in Hebrew. It's in Aramaic. Right now, if it's in Aramaic, people have a hard enough time trying to deal with Hebrew. Aramaic's a different beast. Totally different beast over here. It's, similar conjugations and different things, of the words, but again, it's a totally, it's different. It's different over here. So that's going to add, to this complexity over here. So there's a message over here, verse 18, about a merciful God. Says over here, Daniel chapter 9, verse 18, for not because of our righteousness do we pour out supplications before you, but because of your great compassion. Now, this has been a foundation for Jews, personal, spiritual relationship with God. But that's not where the Christians are going to go. What's their focus? What's their main focus? Verses 24 to 26. Now, it's interesting. There's 23 verses previous So first thing is going to sound a little bit strange is why they go into verse 24. What happened to the previous 23 verses over here? Right? So they're going to translate it like this. Verse 24, you got 70 weeks, right? The importance of 70 weeks, we're going to see. 70 weeks determined upon your people, upon your holy city, finish the transgression, make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, i.e. for sin, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and this is going to be crucial, to anoint the most holy. Verse 25, know before and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, that's going to be underlined, till the Messiah, the Prince, right, also going to be significant here, will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Be built again with pleasant moat, but in troubled times, right? Obviously, seemingly it's mentioned over here about the Messiah, right? We're gonna have to explain what this Messiah, the Prince, is. Okay, take it step by step. Verse 26. After 62 weeks, the Messiah will cut off, but not for himself, people of the Prince, who shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. Right. So we got a period of now. What does it seem like over here? Seems like we're pinpointing the exact time, right? We have an exact time over here, seemingly, right? So, we're gonna have to deal with this. So, what do Christians do over here? They're gonna say this prophecy predicts the exact date, which we just said, when the Messiah is gonna come, when the Messiah is gonna die, and they obviously believed JC fulfilled, these predictions. Now, obviously, it's a problem for us in general, because if you're talking about the Messiah of David, we mentioned before, he can't die. If he dies, he cannot be the Messiah. That's one of the criteria, right? So, the Messiah of Joseph, different issue. He may die, may not die, right? It's a difference of opinion. But the Messiah of David cannot die. So, they're going to claim we have the exact dates, when he's going to come, when he's going to die. And they're going to claim JC fulfilled that prediction. Now, before we delve into all this, we got to point out a few things, right? First the thing is that if you're going according to what the text says, the Aramaic text, the biblical text, and the context pretty crucial, right? That's going to be pretty crucial over here. So when you're going through that, right? We have unbelievable reasons here to reject what the Christians are going to say. That's the first thing. Got to see the context. Second thing is that the New Testament authors never quote these passages in calculation as a proof text. So first thing we're going to have to determine over here is, what is this idea of weeks? Right? Got a lot of things over here. It says it's going to be 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and after 62 weeks, right? What's this idea about weeks? Now, if you look at the Hebrew, the end of chapter 9 uses the Hebrew word shavuim for the word to represent a period of time multiplied by 7. Right? How do we know it's multiplied by 7? Because the word sheva is part of the word. Is shvuim or shvuim, right? Which the root of the word is shin bei zayin. What does shin bei zayin mean? 70. Right? Sorry, 7. Shivim can mean, right, 70, but it means a multiple by 7. So how do they translate it? Right? For a number of reasons, we look at this word translated as weeks. But it means a multiple of 7 years rather than a multiple of 7 days. Now you're going to say, okay, you're blowing smoke over here. How do we know? How do we know that's the case? Because if you look at Leviticus chapter 25, verse 8, it says, you shall count. You shall count Sheva Shabbatot Hashanim. Sheva meaning 7, Shabbatot meaning Sabbath, Hashani means years. It means 7 years times 7 times. What's 7 times 7? Maybe except in physics, is 49. Right? You're going to count. You're counting the Omer. 7 times 7. Right? 7 days, 7 weeks. So you got 49. 49 days. What's the 50th day? 50th day is the holiday of Shavuot. Right? But again, the point over here is you got 7 times 7. Second thing is the Sabbath is a period of how many days? 7. And the Sabbath is the same root of the word, right? Shabbatot, Shabbat, same root, same word, right? So that connotates 7 days. Doesn't mean just the day of Shabbos. It connotates a number of 7. 7 days. That's the second thing. Third thing is the plural of week. How do you say week in Hebrew? Shavua. That's in the singular, 1 week. Shavua echad, 1 week. Right? The plural should be Shavuot. Right? Feminine. Right? Shavuot means weeks. It can also mean the holiday of Shavuos. Right? The giving of the Torah Mount Sinai. But it means weeks. The word Shavuot means weeks. But over here, what's the problem? It doesn't say Shavuot. It says, it uses the masculine. The Yud Mem at the end. Im. Right? Shanim. Plural. Years. Right? Mishpatim. Laws. Plural. Shavuim is also plural, right? But it doesn't mean, the question is, how does it mean weeks over here? The plural of Shavu is not Shavuim, right? The plural of Shavua is Shavuot. So the question is, why does it end with the Yud Mem? Why does it end Im, right? Shavuim, right? That's similar again to Shanim, which means the plural. So it indicates Shavuim is, it can't mean necessarily, it can't doesn't mean weeks per se, not the right conjugation, but at the same time, it's referring to a multiple of 7 years, right? Shavuim, root of the word is Sheva, 7, right? Multiple of 7 years. Now, both the Jews and the Christians are going to agree on this point, right? Okay, very good. We agree that this is referring not to just 2 weeks, a multiple of years. Okay? Multiple of years. Now we'll get to the nitty-gritty what the issue is going to be. If you look at Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. King Cyrus issues a proclamation. He issues a proclamation in writings. And what does he say? He grants the Jews permission to return to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple. Ezra chapter 6, verse 12 to 13. King Darius issues a decree, right, granting permission to rebuild the temple. Ezra chapter 7, verse, these are different words, by the way. King Cyrus in Ezra 1, using a proclamation, what we call a kol, means literally a sound, right? But it means over here a proclamation. The word writings is the word michtav. Michtav usually means like a letter, but here it means writings. Okay. Ezra, it's going to be significant, we'll see. Ezra chapter 6, verse 12 to 13, King Darius issues a decree, a ta'im. Means really taste, right? Here it means a decree. Meaning he's giving means a reason in general, but here it means a decree, granting permission to rebuild the temple. Ezra chapter 7, verses 11 to 16, Artaxerxes, I don't know if I said it right, but I think that's how you pronounce it, issued also a decree. What's the word for decree? Same word, right? Ta'im. Issued a decree granting permission to rebuild the temple. So who is Artaxerxes? Anyone wants to know? He's Persian title of royalty. You can revert to different leaders. Similar to the title Pharaoh by the Egyptians. Right? It was a form of royalty. Persian title of royalty. Now, 70 years, if you look at Jeremiah chapter 5. Jeremiah chapter 5, what does it speak about? 70 years of subjugation. That the Jews are going to be subjugated. Jeremiah chapter 29, 70 years till they return. In other words, 70 years they're going to be exiled, 70 years they come back. right? They're going to return to Jerusalem. That's Jeremiah chapter 29. And the third thing is Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9, what does it speak about? 70 years of destruction of Jerusalem, right? 70 years of, of destruction over here. So now let's try and put everything together, right? This is by way, all way of introduction. So the word Shavua, we said means week. So Daniel chapter 9, each week is how long? Sheva, 7, right? Period of 7 years. So now we're going to look at how the Christians look at it. The Christians say like this. What do they mean? What's this context according to them? They're talking about that Daniel over here is speaking after the destruction of the temple. Who destroyed the temple at that time? Babylonians, right? That was by the Babylonian Empire. Now, at some point, there's going to be a decree. There's going to be some sort of decree to restore and rebuild it, right? In other words, when are they going to start? When is that decree going to start over here? So the claim is, what do we say? What do we say? We said 7 and 62 weeks. How many weeks is that altogether? 69 weeks, right? 7 to 62, 69. 69 weeks of years, i.e. 483, right? Multiplied by 7. You got 483. That amount of time is going to pass, and the Messiah is going to come in that same 7-year period week. Right? Sounds very convoluted over here. But that's the way we're looking at it. In other words, he's going to be cut off, not for himself, but for what? Sins of mankind. Then the city, sanctuary, are going to be destroyed. And their calculation is that JC came fulfill that prophecy. Right? In other words, he came after the destruction and he was killed. Right? And he was killed. And that would fulfill that prophecy. Now, what happened exactly? The Babylonians came, destroyed Jerusalem. So whoever survived, and it was a horrific massacre, an absolutely horrific massacre. So whoever survived, they were exiled from their land. They were thrown out, right? If they're walking to Babylon, and whoever, got out of line or stopped for a minute to rest, they basically got brutally murdered. But they were exiled. So Daniel, where did he live? In Babylon. That's where he lived. And the Babylonians came historically. Babylonians came and did what? They're conquered by the Persians. So you have the Babylonians destroying Jerusalem and the Persians coming, taking over Babylon. Now, come on, the Christians are going to say, what is Daniel chapter 9, verse 25 talking about? That was issued by the Persian king, Artaxerxes. In the year, what year? 444, before the Common Era. How do they know? Because if they look at Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 8, they talk about over there the king giving Nehemiah letters, or igrot, that normally known as letters, for say passes permission to rebuild the temple. Right? So here you got temple destroyed. Right? The Babylonians have taken over. And now they're going to claim, based on that, they got permission to rebuild the temple. Now, when the temple was being rebuilt, it didn't happen in one shot. Right? They started, they stopped. There were other decrees, that were mentioned earlier. It wasn't one fluid movement. You say, they rebuilt the temple, it took them X amount of years. No. Right? It's like any time someone builds. Right? You don't just build for 2 months and you finish. Sometimes you need more supplies. There are problems, other things. So, they built, they stopped, they built, they stopped, etc. But it got halted. The point is, it got delayed. It got delayed several times. Now, we're going to see we're going to see that these verses, there are 4 different words to use to describe these proclamations. Right? We mentioned them, but we're going to see them better in context. There are 4 different words, and none of them match the word used in Daniel 9. Right? Let's keep that in mind. None of these words are used in Daniel 9. That use the word davar, which means word. Right? They use different things for proclamations, but not this word. So what would that tell me? So I got 4 different proclamations, no justification whatsoever to choose one in Nehemiah chapter 2, no reliable source that occurred exactly the time they claim, right, at 444, let's say before the common era. So what do they do? They picked out this passage out of convenience, and they put a date on it. Right? It's kind of like almost like throwing darts. They said, okay, we're going to take this verse. Sounds very good. We'll put it in historical context, and we're going to put a date. We're going to put a date, because if you start at 444 before the common era, and you count 69 weeks of years, i.e. 483 years, what's the year you reach? 39 of the common era. So they're claiming, for whatever reason, that Nehemiah's reference and attributing it to that when it occurred when? 444 before the common era, is still 7 years off. Right? We still got a discrepancy of 7 years. Right? Of that year, 32 of the common era, when JC, according to them, he died. Now, what do we do over here? So they're putting in the numbers. The numbers don't fit. I got a 7-year discrepancy. So what are they going to answer? What's the answer to a 7-year discrepancy? They're going to define the definition of a year. Isn't that convenient? We're going to get Webster's 5th definition, right? We're going to get Webster's 5th definition. How do you define a year? Let's see. So they're going to claim the prophecy, like Daniel over here, is understood in what? Prophetic years. Isn't that interesting? Did you ever hear such a thing as prophetic years? If you're talking about years, what are we talking about? A yearly cycle. Doesn't that what it sounds like? We're going to be like Karaites. No interpretation. It sounds like a year. 360 days. So their prophetic years are going to be a little bit shorter. How many days are there in a year? 365 and a quarter. Based on the Earth's axis. Very good. They're going to claim no. These prophetic years are a little bit shorter. 360 days. So therefore, when's Daniel talking? He's speaking to the Babylonians. And they may have had a 360-year calendar. 360 years. Where do you get that from? Made out of thin air. Why are we going to say, this is a major problem here. Why are you going to say they had a different calendar? If you want to tell me you go buy a solar calendar, right, like the Muslims do, like the Jews do, very good. So you have a 12-day difference between a lunar calendar and a solar calendar. You ever hear of a prophetic calendar? Very interesting. Prophetic calendar, that's 5 days, 5.25 days less than a normal year. What does that sound like? Sounds like a bluff, right? It's unsubstantiated, refuted. Oh, wow. How is it refuted? Because this passage over here, spoken in Hebrew to Jews, had a different calendar than the Babylonians. Babylonians didn't speak Hebrew, they spoke a different language. Right? They spoke their language, they spoke Akkadian. They didn't speak the same language. So they got, what the issue over here is you got 2 different calendars. We have 2 different calendars. Where's that come from? So now they're going to claim, okay, so they have to answer, where did this prophetic year calendar come? Where did it come from? Right? So one attempt that they make comes from the New Testament, Revelations, chapter 11, verses 2-3. What does it say? They will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. Prophecy will be for 1,260 days. Now let's do the math. You divide 1,260 days by 42 months, what do you get? 30 days a month. So they claim that each month is 30 days. So therefore, a prophetic biblical year is going to be 30 times 12. Do the math. Very simple math. 30 times 12, 360. That's where they're going to get it from, right? Again, 1,260 days. You got 42 months. You get 30 days per month. 30 times 12 is 360. So what's their proof going to be? They're going to use it from the Old Testament, i.e. the Torah, by the events, by the flood, right? Because the biblical months back in the day before the flood, were 30 days. How do I know? What's their proof? Genesis chapter 7, verse 24. What does the Torah say? The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. And the flood started on the 17th day of the second month. Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. And it ended when? 17th day of the seventh month. That's Genesis chapter 8, verse 4. Now, what are they doing over here? So they're arguing, we're going to take this a 5-month period, right? Second month to 7th month, 7 minus 2, 5. See, I was very good at this type of math. Geometry, different issue. Seen in more than one direction? Nah. You know what's more than one dimension? Big problem by me. Any case, they're arguing this exact 5-month period. 5 months, how many days? 150. 5 and 150 is what? 30. Right? So you got 5 months, 30 days. Therefore, I got 360 days. So they're going to use the biblical text of the flood to show that I have a 5-month period, 150 days. Each month is 30 days. Now, as we mentioned before, there's going to be a difference between a solar year, i.e. 365 days, 365 and a quarter days, right? That's a solar year. And the so-called prophetic year of 360 days, right? We have this 7-year discrepancy. So the way they're going to look at it is that they're going to say, we're going to look at Daniel chapter 9, and we're going to accomplish this by converting the time period from biblical years to solar years. Now, even before we get to that, think about it. You got a 7-year discrepancy. Now you have to jump through hoops over here. And you're going to say, you know what? A prophetic year, we're going to go take it back from the Bible. We're going to go from biblical years to solar years. I don't know. It's a little bit of a leap of faith over here. What's the argument over here? Let's see. What do they argue? They argue by multiplying 360 days, right? That's their prophetic year. By 483 years, i.e. 69 weeks of the years that we saw before. So how many days do you get? How many of these prophetic days, if you do the math, you get 100, I'll save you the trouble, you get 173,880. That's the math, 69 times 483. Now, if you want to convert this to a solar calendar, to a solar year, you got to divide that by 365 and a quarter. So how many years do you get? Comes out very neat, 476. Right? 476. Now, so what? So what does 476 represent? 444 before the Common Era. And I add 476 years. What year do I get to at that point? 32 of the Common Era. 32, we just said before. Their claim is that's the year JC not only made his triumphant entry to Jerusalem, right, i.e. what they're calling the Messiah's arrival, but he also got killed. He also got crucified. He got cut off, right? So this is very problematic, right? This seems, they claim, we have a leap of faith and, we can't prove anything and all this. This is jumping through hoops, an absolute act of desperation that, you're going to say, I got a certain amount of prophetic days. I'm going to multiply 360 because I don't want to have 365, but I got a 7-year difference. So they're going through all these hoops to try and get to this answer, to get to 32 of the Common Era, to say that JC entered and then he was killed. That's what we call in the vernacular an act of desperation. Right now, so there are a lot of problems here, right? A number of problems. Let's analyze what the text says, right? And what is going on over here. So first thing is that that we want to say you should not read the passage as it were speaking about the Messiah, because their claim is that's exactly what it's talking about, right? It's talking about, that's the case. That is the, context. Now, why do they say that? Because their translation have the word Messiah mentioned twice in the chapter. Now, that's a mistranslation. Why is it a mistranslation? What's the Hebrew word they're translating, or mistranslating, let's say better? The word Mashiach. Now, we said before, a few weeks back, by King David, right? Being the line of David and being a king and a priest. What does the word Mashiach mean? We said before, right? Do a little bit of, give everyone a test there. The final Jeopardy question is, right? What is anointed? The word Mashiach over here means to anoint. Does not mean the Messiah here, right? If you look at Samuel 1, chapter 10, verses 1 to 2, the word clearly means an act of consecration, right? Means to anoint, not a personal pronoun, right? Not a personal pronoun, meaning it's talking about an individual. That's a major problem, right? The construct of the word is a problem. Doesn't mean an individual called the Messiah, right? The word Mashiach is used throughout Jewish scripture no less than 100 times. And what does it refer to? A variety of individuals and objects, right? So it usually means to anoint, right? So it's talking about priests in Leviticus chapter 4, verse 3. You got Kings 1, chapter 1, verse 39, Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1, Exodus chapter 40, verses 9 to 11, etc. So if you look at what the Christians do, the word over here, Mashiach, 99% of the time, right, according to them, is translated as anointed. Even 99% of the time, they got it right. But there's an exception. There's an exception, always a but, right? There's an exception. What's the exception? Twice in Daniel 9, verses 25 and 26. Right? There, they take it totally out of context to say it's talking about the Messiah. Right? Because if you're going to look at it in this way, that they translate it as anointed one verse earlier, when it's used in Daniel 9, verse 24, why all of a sudden, in verse 25 and 26, they change the translation? Why doesn't it mean anointed across the board? Very interesting, right? In one place it means anointed. In all the other places it means anointed. Over here it doesn't mean that. The next verse it means, it means the Messiah. So in this instance, what's it referring to? It's referring to the innermost chamber of the Holy Temple, known as the Kodesh Kadoshim, right? The Kodesh Kadoshim, i.e. the Holy of Holies. So therefore, how could they mistranslate it, as some missionaries do? They translate it as the most holy one, to refer to the Messiah, rather than a place. So if you look in the Torah and other, and throughout TaNaCh, whenever the Holy of Holies, Kodesh Kadoshim, is mentioned, it's talking about where the high priest goes, the Kohen Gadol goes in once a year on Yom Kippur. That's called the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies is never a reference to a person. Ever. Never referenced as a person. Now, interesting. So some missionaries are going to come over here and say, the Kodesh Kadoshim represents what? The most holy one. Would you ever see such a translation? Never. Right? The Holy of Holies is never translated like that. So now, how are we going to look at this passage? So Daniel, it should be translated like this. Daniel 9, verse 24 says, until an anointed prince, and not as until Messiah, the prince. That's a major difference. Right? Daniel 9, verse 25, an anointed one will be cut off. How do they translate it? The Messiah will be cut off. So again, in the previous verse that it says, when it's talking about Mashiach, it's talking about, they translated someone being anointed. right? The next two verses, they translated as the Messiah, right? But why is the translation changed? Not only that, in verse 25, if we're going to get grammatical, which they can't read Hebrew, so they're not going to understand this, but if you're going to get grammatical, there's no definite article, right? There's no hey. A hey in front of the word is usually a definite article, right? Before the word Mashiach. Doesn't say HaMashiach, right? HaMashiach, if you're going to tell me, it's referring to the Messiah, maybe you should tell me that, because that's a definite article, right? Grammatically, that would make sense, but doesn't say that. In no translation does it say it. It says Mashiach. Doesn't say the Mashiach. So therefore, you shouldn't translate it as the Messiah or the anointed one. There's no definite article, right? So therefore what? Therefore grammatically, again, I mentioned any interpretation, right? Grammatically, you don't have the hey. If I don't have the hey, it's not talking about an exclusive individual. If I had the hey, it's a different issue, right? In any Hebrew text, there's no hey over there. So when you translate correctly as an anointed individual, who could that be referenced to? Any one of several different individuals or objects, right, that were anointed. Doesn't necessarily mean the Messiah. It could be the high priest. It could be a regular priest. It could be a consecrated article of the temple that becomes an anointed thing. Who says it's talking about the Messiah? They're claiming that. Okay. They're claiming that's who it is. But again, grammatically, it doesn't make sense. Again, Hebrew grammar points this out. Now, if we look at the context and the understanding of what this chapter is referring to, it's like another mistake, right? And before we get there, there's another mistake. The translation of 7 and 62 weeks, right? If you look at 7 and 62 weeks, it's one undivided unity of 69 weeks, right? 62 and 7 is 69. So what do they say? They make it sound as if the arrival time and cutting off point is going to take place 69 weeks, i.e. 483 years, after a decree to restore Jerusalem. So they add the 7 and the 62, right? They get these 762 weeks together. And they have one person, i.e. the Messiah, over here. And you have two events occurring towards the end of that 69th week. Now, what's the problem? Right? That's seemingly what they're doing. But what's the problem? If you look at the Hebrew translation, or let's say better, you look at the Hebrew, the 7 and 62 weeks are two separate and distinct periods. They're not the same. Right? What could Daniel have said? Daniel could have said 69 weeks. Why does it say 7 and 62? Two different time periods. One event happens after 7 weeks, another after 62 weeks. It's not all one unit, right? So if you're going to say 69, you would not have said 7 and 62. It's another issue, right? How would you have said 69 according to the Torah? You would have said 60 and 9. Where do you get 7 and 62? Right? Yeah, I have to explain what 7 and 62 is. Right? You would not say, you wouldn't say this. So it must be that you're talking about two different things. Right? Two different periods over here. So further, right? We'll go further here. That it says 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now, what could it have said? What could it have said? Very simple, 7 and 62 weeks. Why does it say 7 weeks and 62 weeks? Because the use of the word weeks after each number also shows what? Separate events. Because if you're going to say 7 weeks, 62 weeks, what does that sound like? Two different things. Right? It doesn't sound like one event. It sounds like two things. So the use of the definite article, i.e. the hey, in front of it, which means the, in verse 26. Because what does it say? In verse 26, it says, and after the 62 weeks. Not just after 62 weeks. What's these 62 weeks? Shall anointed one be cut off? Now, in some Christian translations, they delete that. Why? That's very convenient, right? Because they'll say after 62 weeks. What's these 62 weeks imply? Separate event. But its presence in the Hebrew indicates 62 weeks be treated as what? As we said, a separate period of time from the original 7 weeks. So now, how would we translate? What's the proper translation? Proper translation is until an anointed prince shall be 7 weeks, i.e. 49 years, right? 7 times 7 is 49. Then for 62 weeks, 430 years, Jerusalem will be built. It, i.e. Jerusalem, will be built again, but in troubled times. And then, after those 62 weeks, or after these 62 weeks, shall anointed one be cut off. That's how you would translate it. Daniel chapter 9, verses 24, 25. So what do I have? What do I have over here? 2 separate events, and I have anointed ones. 62 weeks, i.e. 434 years apart. So another issue is going to be over here. Another mistranslation. The translation of the Hebrew ve'ein lo, right? At the end of Daniel chapter 9, verse 26. How do they translate ve'ein lo? They translate it as he will be cut off, but not for himself. Well, what does that mean? According to them, what does that mean? Someone being cut off, not for himself, but cut off for who? For us. Indicating a form of some type of, attainment or maybe atonement, whatever it is. But nowhere in the Torah or anywhere in the Jewish Bible are these words translated not for himself. Nowhere. Doesn't say anywhere that that's what it means. Now, the Hebrew means, the ve'ein lo means, he will be no more. I.e., no more of him. What does it mean, no more of him? Indicates person died. Finished. He's gone. Finality. Right? Totally, done over here. Similar usage. Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 32. It says ve'ein lo, and it's translated as no one. Not for himself. Ve'ein lo means, right, not to him. Right? It really means, or he won't have. Right, so to speak. Right? But it means no one. That's what it means. It means no one. Doesn't mean not to him. Right? Doesn't mean, not for himself. So it says the proud one shall stumble and fall with no one to raise him up. That's what it says over there in Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 32. Right? Right? For make him lo ve'ein. Right? Ve'ein lo make. No one, i.e. ve'ein lo, no one will raise him up. What's that referring to? What's the context, which is pretty crucial? Context is the demise of Babylon, destruction of Babylon. Same connotation, right, that after someone's demise, i.e., he's not going to be around anymore, therefore it means no one's going to continue his rule. So when it talks about the demise of Babylon, they're out. They got taken over. Also interesting, the Hebrew word kares, right, translated as cut off, can also mean spiritually cut off, right? They translate it as being cut off. What does it refer to? Someone who sinned so grievously they're put to death by heavenly decree as divine punishment for their own transgressions. For their own transgressions, right? Spiritually cut off. That's normally what it means. Now, we have 8 mistranslations. 8 mistranslations that are going to be pretty crucial over here. Right? First one is that the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, does not mean the most holy one. Second thing is the word davar, that means words, doesn't mean decree. They're claiming it's a decree, doesn't mean that. The word Mashiach twice means anointed, not the Messiah. Fifth thing is 7 weeks and 62 means 2 events, 2 separate events. Right? 7 weeks, another 62 events, 62 weeks. The hate means the, it's not there. Ve'ein lo means will be no more, not for himself. And the word kares means death to the transgressor, cuts off their relationship to God. Now, looking at these mistranslations, there's also a manipulation over here of the 69 weeks. It's also a major problem. Why? Because he wants that the New Testament wants they're going to coincide with the arrival and death of JC in Jerusalem. Now, how do they understand? Where do they get that? Again, they're saying the prophecy started in 444 before the Common Era. There was a decree, right, issued by King Artaxerxes, Ezra chapter 7, verse 11 to 16. We mentioned before. Then I got 69 weeks, 483 years, brings you to 39 of the Common Era. Again, 7-year discrepancy. So you got 7 years of commonly accepted dates, being the year JC's put to death. Okay, so they have their way to try and resolve this issue. Because they make up a new thing, it's called prophetic years, which we never heard of. Torah doesn't speak about anything about this, right? But they're claiming, okay, there's such an idea as prophetic years, right? Problem is, we don't hold by it. There's no such thing. Nowhere in the Torah, nowhere in the writings, nowhere in the prophets mentions anything about a prophetic year, right? The Jewish calendar is two things. There's a solar calendar and a lunar calendar. Genesis chapter 1, verse 14 deals with the creation of the sun and the moon, and we're told, let there be light in the firmament, the heaven, to divide the day from night. Let them be for signs, for seasons, for days, for years. Both luminaries are used to determine our calendar, the sun and the moon. So how long do we understand the solar year is? 365 days and a quarter. Lunar year, 11 days shorter. Right? That's why we got to make an adjustment, have we have a leap year, 7 years within 20 years, because the holidays have to be at the right time. Right? The Torah says Sukkot has to be in the fall, because if you go in the Sukkah when it's cold, you're doing it for the mitzvah, not just for shade if it would be in the summer. Passover has to be in the spring. Right? That's pretty clear. So they have to make an adjustment. The Muslims don't. So they also live in a lunar calendar. But by the Muslims, Ramadan can be winter, spring, summer, or fall. They don't make adjustments. Okay. So the non-Jewish year is the length of the month set by what? By convention. It's not a relationship to the lunar calendar. Totally different. A biblical Jewish calendar, right, has to coincide with both. You need the sun for seasons, you need the moon. So God commanded Israel to sanctify the months. He established the month Exodus took place in the first of the months, i.e. Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. Right? The new months. God also commanded us to observe Passover in springtime, that we said. Right? Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 1. Observe the month of springtime. Perform the Passover for God. The month of springtime, God took you out of Egypt. Can't do it any other time. You have to do it in the spring. So a biblical calendar must coincide with the months. Right? With the seasons created in the solar lunar calendar. So we said there's an 11-day difference between the solar and the lunar year. And if Jewish holidays were established solely by lunar year, again, the holidays would move further and further away. Right? So it happens at a time when the Muslim lunar calendar, as we mentioned, by Ramadan, can fall in a variety of seasons. Right? But we have a 13-month leap year, right? Approximately every 4 years, or 7 and 20, something like that. Some years are 12 months, a leap year is 13. But we don't have anything. That's all we have. We have a lunar calendar, we have a solar calendar. Right? We don't have anything else, no such thing as a prophetic year. Right, now, let's get to the context. What are we talking about? All right, see if I can get through this. I don't know if we'll get through all of it. We'll see. Maybe give me a few more minutes here. Let's see. So let's get to Daniel chapter 9. What's going on?
Sure. Go ahead.
Come on, I still got 10 minutes.
Yes,
I got 13 minutes here. Come on, we're still good.
All right.
What's the major problem here? Major problem is that if you look at the beginning of Daniel's prophecy, we have the problem of this mistranslation. Right? It says, "Know therefore and discern that from going forth of the decree," that's going to be a problem, but the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That's Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Now, if you're going to tell me that according to them, that's the starting of the prophecy, i.e. there's a decree to rebuild Jerusalem, what's the assumption, the wrong assumption? Wrong assumption is that's the decree of the king Artaxerxes. But we mentioned before, there were several different decrees made concerning rebuilding Jerusalem. Who says it's that one? Right? They're going to say, oh, that's the one it represents. Right? I could have 10 different possibilities. They're going to say, nope, it's that one. So the original Hebrew uses the word davar. The word davar is different than a human decree. What does the word davar mean? It's a prophetic word. Because if you look at the beginning of Daniel chapter 9, verse 2, this word is used when Daniel says he wants to understand the words of the Lord to the prophet Jeremiah. So in all passages that mention some form of decree and proclamation, that word is not used. The word davar is not used. Now, what's the right translation? Know therefore and discern from going forth of the words, not decree. Big difference. To restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That's Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Therefore, the starting point of the prophecy has to be associated with what? A prophetic words. Cannot be a human decree. That's the first thing. Second thing is the beginning of Daniel chapter 9. Right? What does it say? Clarifies the correct meaning of the reference, i.e. the word to restore and build Jerusalem, as we said in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. In other words, it says, Daniel chapter 9, verse 2, I, Daniel, considered or contemplated in the books the number of years which the word, i.e. davar, the word of God came to Jeremiah the prophet, that would accomplish to the destruction of the temple. Now, what is he thinking about? He's thinking about the number of years Jeremiah had spoken about. Because he prophesied twice concerning the 70-year period. Remember, the word davar is not a decree. The word davar means prophecy. Right? It's talking about a word of a prophet over here. That's what it's talking about. Right? That's exactly what it's talking about. Right? The years that the word of God came to Jeremiah. Prophecy. Right? So once Jeremiah said, Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11 to 12, these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And it shall come to pass 70 years are accomplished. I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation and make an everlasting desolation. What does it mean? It's going to wipe them out. Totally wipe them out. That the prophecy says Babylon's going to dominate Israel for how long? 70 years. Now, Jeremiah also says, chapter 29, verse 10, after 70 years you accomplished to Babylon, you knocked them out. I will take heed of you and perform my good words towards you and causing you to return to this place. Meaning, Babylon's going to get wiped out. You're going to be able to come back. Right? So after the 70 years, in addition to the end of the Babylonian domination, Jews are coming back. Right? Seemingly, Jews are going to come back over here. So now, I got two prophecies, right, concerning two things. The Jewish subjugation to the Babylonians and coming back. So when does the 70 years start? Subjugation of Jerusalem by who? By Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon. When did that take place? 18 years before destruction of Jerusalem. Right? Because it says that we know that the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar. How do we know? Because it says Jeremiah chapter 52, verses 12 to 13, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar, chief executioner, right, the butcher of Baghdad, we'll call him, right, was in service to the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, destroyed the temple of God. So that's already in the 19th year. Right, so now the 19th year means 18 full years have been completed. So he started to subjugate Jerusalem in the first year of his rule, 18 years before. So we all go all the way back to Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. It says in King Joachim's third completed year, Nebuchadnezzar came to besiege Jerusalem. Right, in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 1, the fourth year, 3 completed years of Joachim was the first year of Nebuchadnezzar. What does it tell me? Right, what's the point? That Nebuchadnezzar started to besiege Jerusalem in the first year, right, in his first year, but it took how many years? 19 years. But the total destruction took 19 years, right, in his 19th year. So I needed 18 complete years from beginning of the siege till the end. And then Jerusalem was laid siege and completely surrounded. So now, I got the 70 years of Jeremiah, completed with the advent of Cyrus, king of Persian Empire. What did it say? Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. First year of Cyrus, king of Persia, word of the Lord by mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. Oh, now there's a connection over here. Right? You look at Chronicles 2, chapter 36, verses 20, 23. Those who survived the sword be exiled to Babylon. That we said. Right? They became slaves, sons until the kingdom of Persia began to reign. When Persia knocked them out. This was a fulfillment of the word of God to Jeremiah, till the land would be appeased of its sabbatical years, all the years of desolation. It rested completion of 7 years. First year of Cyrus, king of Persia, upon the expiration of God's prophecy spoken by Jeremiah. God aroused the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, issue his proclamation, build God a temple in Jerusalem. Right? And that we see that Babylonians' rule ended when? And the fulfillment of what Jeremiah said in chapter 25, verses 11 to 12. And that Cyrus came along and gave permission to rebuild the temple, as it says in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. Right? That's what it says. So, in Ezra chapter 1, verses 4, it says, whoever's among you all the people, let God be with them when they go up to Jerusalem, etc., build the house of the Lord. Now, we have to keep in mind, from the beginning, again, it gets a little bit, complicated with the numbers here, but we're going to try and make it easy. The beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, that's 18 years before the fall of Jerusalem. Right, until the fall of the Babylonian Empire. Cyrus came into power. How many years elapsed? 70. 70 years elapsed. Now, if I take 18 years, I subtract 18 years over here before the destruction of the first temple. From the total of 70, how many are left with? 70 minus 12. 70 minus 18, you got 52. So when did King Cyrus rise to power and fulfill Jeremiah's prophecy? 52 years after the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, that's crucial. See, they're not telling you this information, but you need this background information to understand what Daniel 9 is talking about. Because Daniel not only yearned for the Babylonian Empire to see 70 years after the subjugation, what did he want? He wanted the return to Jerusalem, rebuilding of the temple. So in chapter 9, when's he talking about the first year of Darius? Darius the Median. And he's mentioned earlier, Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. He's called the Mede. Why? So he wouldn't be confused with Darius, son of Ahasuerus, the Persian who was born late in the days of Haman and Esther. Right? Two different Darius. Now, what was Daniel confused by? Because you have Darius, the 70 years, the Babylonian subjugation, were over. Right? Seemingly they were over. That fulfilled Jeremiah chapter 25. Right? But Daniel had not seen the fulfillment of Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. That after 70 years, Jewish exiles are going to come back, rebuild Jerusalem. So he didn't see the fact that Cyrus is going to rule and fulfill that promise. That he didn't see. Right? That he didn't see. He thought maybe, why wouldn't that be? Maybe the sins of the Jewish people. Maybe they got delayed. So Daniel confesses the sins of the people in verses 40 to 20. Right? Maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's why it's totally delayed. Right? So now, Daniel chapter 9, verse 20, he says, I was speaking and praying, confessing my sins, the sins of my people. Israel casted my supplication before the Lord my God about the holy mountain, i.e. the sanctuary, as we see in Isaiah chapter 56, verse 7, etc. That's why at the beginning of the chapter, Daniel's contemplating a number of years. For what? For the destruction of Jerusalem, not subjugate, totally different. He's talking about the destruction over here, not when they started, not when the subjugation began, right? So it says again, Daniel chapter 9, verse 2, I, Daniel, contemplate the calculations, the number of years, that which the word of God, not decree, came to the prophet Jeremiah, to complete 70 years, to what? To the destruction of Jerusalem. So what did he see? He saw subjugation was over, but no return. There's no return to Jerusalem. So you want to know when that's going to be. So then we see Darius came. The rule of Darius, King Cyrus took power, fulfilled Jeremiah chapter 29. Jews come back. But still he wants to understand, Daniel wants to understand the years of Jeremiah to the destruction of Jerusalem. Right? So now, we're going to see there are three different prophecies here. Three different things going on, right, at the same time. You got three different things. First of all, the calculation, the first began when? 18 years before destruction, right? So you get 70 years total destruction. You got to need a different starting point, right? Day when Jerusalem was destroyed, right? Therefore, until the completion of the building, temple was exactly how many years? 70. Now, Daniel's praying, confessing, contemplating about destruction. The angel Gabriel, verse 21, reveals to him and expanded the prophecy 70 weeks. Now, there's an extra time period here, right? It's an extra 70 weeks. So what's the starting point of the prophecy? That from going of the word to restore, rebuild Jerusalem, that's Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. Also talking about the destruction of the first temple. So now comes along, Daniel uses the word davar, right, in verse 25 and in verse 2. That is the beginning point. What's that beginning point? What do they have in common? Destruction. It's talking about destruction of Jerusalem. So now it makes sense what's going on in verse 24, 26. From the prophetic words, talking about what? Destruction of the first temple. Until an anointed prince, i.e. a Nagid is correctly translated as a leader, right? Prince over here means a leader over here. Going to be for 7 weeks, 49 years. That's from the destruction of Jerusalem until Cyrus was 52 years, which is within the 7th week, i.e. 49 years before the 8th week, or 56 years. Now, Cyrus himself didn't rebuild the temple. Then he not only initiated it, right, but he's also called identified as God's anointed. A lot of sources. Ezra chapter 1, verse 1 to 3. Ezra chapter 5, verse 13. Ezra chapter 6, verse 3. Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28, etc. And it's in Isaiah 45, verse 1, thus says the Lord to his anointed Cyrus. Doesn't mean he's the Messiah. 2 anointed subjects, one after another here. Right, one after 7 weeks, one after 62 weeks. Right, that prince leader in Daniel 9:25 is who? It's King Cyrus. Came 7 weeks of years after the destruction of Jerusalem. Then he made the decree to rebuild, right, Jerusalem, and it would be built again, additional 62 weeks, 434 years, but in troubled times, i.e. Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, foreign domination, right, by the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, etc., and their allusions in Daniel 11. Romans are alluded to in Daniel chapter 1, verse 30. So now I got 69th week, 483 years after destruction of the first temple, 1 week, 7 years for destruction of the second temple, an anointed one is cut off. Now, no definite article we mentioned, right? So we can refer to several different anointed subjects. King Agrippus, the last king of Israel, right? They're considered anointed. Chronicles 1, chapter 11, right? He was killed during that time. Also refers to the last high priest. Also, we're anointed, Leviticus chapter 4. Sacrifice is anointed, chapter 8, verses 11 in Leviticus. Again, all three considered anointed, cut off during the final week of destruction, right? So I guess to finish up here, that the people of the prince come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's verse 26, chapter 9. Who's that referring to? Roman legions of Vespasian and Titus destroyed Jerusalem. And then whatever, we'll go through all that, how it refers to them. Or we'll kind of skip that just to finish here. So Daniel 9, the original 70 years are from the destruction of the first temple to the building of the second. Because if they would have come back already, there wouldn't be no need for the second temple, right? It would have been already destroyed. So then it would have already been fulfilled over here. So 70 weeks, 490 years, determined upon what? Determined upon your people, Daniel 9 for 24, and upon your holy city, finish the transgression, make the end of sins, and all that, to anoint what? The Holy of Holies. So the angel Gabriel reveals to Daniel the understanding is 70 years. That's 70 years to 70 weeks of years, stretching the time of how many years? 490. Right? Destruction of the first temple, destruction of the second temple. Then I get 70 years of the first exile, 52 years until Cyrus, 18 years additional to the second temple. And again, you get 420 years altogether. So if we go through the verses, right, I guess we'll end with this. You go through the verses, right, you get 70 weeks, right, Daniel chapter 24, 9, verse 24. You get 70 weeks, 490 years, determined upon your people, upon your holy city, finish the transgression, make an end of sins, make a reconciliation for your iniquity, and bringing everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision and prophecy, to anoint the Holy of Holies. Verse 25, know there and discern in issuing a word, restore and rebuild Jerusalem when? Starting from its destruction. Again, now just adding information. Until an anointed prince, who's that? Cyrus, 7 weeks, 49 years, and then for 62 weeks, i.e. 434 years, right? Just do the math. We built again with the plaza, the moat, but in troubled times. What is troubled times? Persians, Greeks, Roman domination. Last thing, verse 26, after the 62 weeks, 483 years, destruction of the first temple, an anointed one. Who was that? Could be sacrifices, last Jewish priest, could be the king, will be cut off, will be no more, they're going to be wiped out. And the people of the prince, i.e. the Romans, as we understand it, who's to come? They'll destroy the city, sanctuary, in the 70th week, 490 years after destruction of the first temple. So when you look at it, and now, you have to go back to Jeremiah, right? That's the first thing. You have to go back to Jeremiah. You have to understand what the context is, who the prince is talking about, what the numbers are, what the 70 years, where you get all this, etc. Because if you look at Jeremiah chapter 25, that's going to predict the king of Babylon is going to be punished at the end of 70 years. Jeremiah chapter 29 predicted the return of the land after 70 years. And that's pretty clear, right? It's going to be desolation. It's going to be an astonishment. The nations will serve the king of Babylon, blah, blah, blah. Chapter 29, verse 11, 25, verse 11 to 12, right? So to make a claim, it's referring to JC. I mean, it is extremely, problematic. Not to mention, first of all, you got 8 mistranslations, total mistranslations, right? But the question is, how do you look at the 70 years and how the 70 years work? Is it talking about destruction? Is it talking about coming back? What's Daniel confused about? You need so much other information, right? Which I sort of ran through, right? But we went through, there's so much information there to go through to make the calculation and who it's talking about, according to the verses. It's impossible to say certainly what the Christians say, not to mention the fact there's no such thing as a prophetic year. No matter they say it in the New Testament, there's no base. There's no base in anything. And not only that, you get, according to them, the way they work out the years, you have an extra 7 years. You got an extra 7 years, so they invent something, that never existed. Because we prove from the Torah you either have a solar year or a lunar year. There is nothing else. So you got a 7-year discrepancy that makes no sense over here. But even with that, even with the mistranslations, the most important aspect is exactly what the verses are talking about, right? Which we said at the beginning, right? You got 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and after 62 weeks, right? So what's the reference, right? Obviously, you need something else going on here. There's a lot of information that is missing, right? What's it referring to? Go back to the beginning of Daniel chapter 9. What's he confused about, right? What in the world is he confused about over here, right? So there are a lot of words, a lot of mistranslations, but there's a lot of information missing, right? And if you don't put the pieces together to know which prophecy and what it's talking about, right? It's not a decree. Obviously, we said it's about prophecy, right? Then you got to put the pieces together. Once you put the pieces of the puzzle together, okay, this is not an easy thing to understand, right? Not by any stretch. But when you put the pieces together and you see how it fits and what it's talking about, they're jumping through hoops to prove this and prove that, all through mistranslations, and adding numbers that don't exist, right? A prophetic year that doesn't exist, all these different things, right? So that is the proper way to look at, Daniel chapter 9. But, just understand one thing, right? One last thing in that, these things, these prophecies are extremely hard to understand, right? In other words, to look at a translation is one thing, right? To understand the context and what's going on, they pick from the end of the chapter. Well, what about the beginning? What about the context of the beginning and what in the world's going on? They're obviously the question's better than their answer, right? But when you look at it as a package and you see it's all related to the prophecy of Jeremiah, you got to go back to that and you got to see what it's talking about. And you got to see how the pieces fit, right? And, once you do, you see that they don't have a leg to stand on, right? They have absolutely zero leg, to stand on, not to mention the grammatical errors and all that. So that, I guess, you gave me an extra few minutes.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to thank you for that, even though you messed up at the beginning. I'm not going to let you live that down.
So it was well worth it, is what you're saying.
yeah, exactly, because it wasn't my fault. In any case, that's, I guess that is going to be a wrap.
That sounds good. Rabbi, thank you for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week, Hashem willing. I guess I could say.
Yeah, next week we're good.
All right, very good. Well, thank you all once again. Please hit that like button if you're enjoying this series, and we will see you again soon. Rabbi, we'll talk to you next week. Thank you. Shalom, everybody. Peace.
Shalom, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going, and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNachTalk.com, TANACHTALK.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
חשוב